Welcome, Michael Murphy. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Well, thank you for everything this last decade with you.
I know we were figuring out it's been 10 years, just like Mary Lou.
Yes, I didn't know you or Mary Lou existed 10 years ago until one afternoon at a old cemetery in Council Bluffs.
Well, let's talk about that because to me, that was really the launch of kind of this incredible journey of people I met in the Omaha area and the Council Bluffs area and just that Missouri River running between the two cities. And it was Mary Lou McGinn that introduced us, and she put together this um, kind of like a Native American acknowledgement of the historical marker we did for Billy Caldwell.
You know, uh, many cultures across the world believe that we die uh, a few times when our heart stops and when they have ceremony and when we're put in the ground, and then finally when we're forgotten. And you've done so much to keep Billy Caldwell alive in so many of us, and it was a real blessing. I, as you know, my mother passed away 40 years ago, and I was a musician, and I played the piano and the guitar, and I played harmonica, all kinds of folk stuff. And I felt bad because my mother's father, on her father's side, he was part Mohawk, and on her mother's side, she was part Huron. And there's a guy named Charlie Hill. My mother's last name was Hill. There's a comedian. I saw him perform once on YouTube. I've seen him perform many times on YouTube, I guess. But so I always wondered if Charlie Hill was related to me. But he said that his parents, his ancestors were Mohawk and Huron, so it makes him a moron Indian. And, and I say my father was Irish, and so I'm a total moron. But a few years after my mother passed, I was, since my mother passed, I was feeling a little guilty about having so much of my Irish in my folk music. It wasn't all Irish folk music, but it was that line continued, and I wanted to bring my mother's music, and we all hear the drum, and I just didn't feel connected with that. And my oldest son started kindergarten, and the first day of school he had homework, and we lived out north of Omaha in a place called Ponca, after the Ponca Indians. And um, uh, his teacher sent all the kids home with homework. And the first day of school, and I wanted to encourage education. My wife was a special ed school teacher, and education was important, although it was less important for me growing up. But uh, so I said, "You got homework?" And I smiled, and under my breath, I thought, "What a mean teacher." But I asked him what his homework was. He said to do a craft with his mom and dad. And I said, "A craft?" He goes, "Yes, I'm supposed to do a craft and bring it to school for show and tell." And so I thought about a half a second, and I think my mother was probably guiding me that whole way. And knowing that you're going to school in this great country, you weren't going to learn much of Native American history or culture. And so I wanted to bridge that a little bit. So we went to the Florence Library, which is right by where I live still today. And we checked out a book on Native American crafts, knowing that we were going, I know, and he didn't know what we were going to do, but we're going to make a dream catcher. And the last page was how to make a flute. And I had never considered that before then. I thought, oh, the flute would be a nice way to bring some Native American music into my musical whatever. And so, as a poor couple with our first child, I didn't even feel good about putting a dime in the copy machine or a nickel to make a copy of that last page. So I wrote it all down on the back of a sheet of paper that had something else on it and kept it knowing that I would make a flute someday, hopefully. That was my intention. And as a young father with a young child and work and everything else, I kept putting it off. And there's a luthier here in Omaha, John Hargis, and I stumbled across him somehow magically as well. And he had a shop in town, and I was driving by a shop one day, and I thought I'll just stop and stick my head in and say hello. And he was on the phone, and so I politely didn't butt into his conversation and let him get off the phone. And he said, "Hey, John, how are you doing?" And he looked at me kind of cold and blank and said, just mumbled, "Okay." And I said, "Oh, who are you talking to?" And he goes, mumbled, "is my brother." And he was from a small community, kind of a small country town in Missouri, where he learned his woodworking craft from his father, and people fixed everything themselves. And so I was excited to know that he was talking to his family. I said, "Oh, well, how are things?" And he says his brother called him to tell him that his mother just passed away. And I said, "Oh my God, John, I'll get out of here. You got to go." He goes, "I can't leave. I've got this guitar for this guy in this band that needs it this weekend. I've got this violin for this person in the symphony orchestra that needs it this weekend. I've got this bass guitar for somebody else in another band that." I said, what do you got to do to fix them?" He goes, "No, they're all done. I just have to be here for whenever they can come and pick them up, and I've got other things to do." I said, "Is there anything you need to do right now?" He goes, "No, there's nothing that's really important." I said, "Good, let's write everything down and I'll watch your shop for a few days." And he goes, "Why?" And I said, "Because when my parents died, people took care of me, and I'll never be able to pay them back. I can pay it forward." And so he left. I kicked him out of his shop and sent him on the road down to Missouri. And I watched his shop for a few days. And I brought some 2x2s that I had laying around the house into his shop, and he had every woodworking tool I could ever imagine. And I made my first flute from that page or that Native American craft book that I checked out of the Florence Library when my son started school. And this is a year or two later. And blew the sawdust out of it after I had it kind of assembled and glued up. And I breathed into it. And I started, it just sounded magical. It was, I've got, of course, I've got flutes here. And so and it was about this size and not near this good, but it wasn't bad. I got lucky. And after making a couple more flutes, I realized that was kind of um, lucky, and I didn't quite understand why, but you think somebody's guiding you. So anyhow, I I have some dexterity from playing guitar and piano and stuff, so I covered the holes and I just breathed into it. And I knew there was a melody, and so I started going back down, just kind of. and I, my eyes, I knew I was allergic to Native American flute music right away because my eyes started watering, and I was crying. I was hearing my mother sing, and I blew into it soft because I didn't want it to sound bad, and if it sounded bad, I didn't want anybody to hear it. And when you play the flute, you have to breathe soft, and it reminds us to speak soft. Anytime I've ever yelled at you, you turned me off right away. Um, and so my mother was teaching me, and I never played the flute before, but it just made sense. And people said, "Well, who taught you?" I said, "Well, my mother," and that's my story. And John Hargis's mother and my mother from the other side made that happen. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to figure it out. When I join them, we'll laugh about it because we'll know. And so I started playing the flute, and I would play the flute when I was playing at a whatever kind of a gig I got. Most of my stuff was a lot of social justice things, and I started getting invited to Native American things, and started being accepted in a community that I never really hardly knew existed, and started getting to meet people. And somehow, when the Billy Caldwell uh, ceremony that you had happened, somebody said we should have Michael Murphy play the flutes, and somebody found me, and I was honored and got to be part of that, and got to meet you and Mary Lou and everyone else. And
That was really the beginning. Was that 2015? I'm thinking it was 2015.
it was I just from I didn't remember except I watched some of your other podcasts and cycle, and I'm not good with dates because that's a reminder that I'm so old. And I joke with you, I'm in my late 40s, and so you're in your late 30s. You don't know.
Well, it was such a beautiful ceremony. It was at the St. Joseph Cemetery where Mary Lou helped us secure a place to put that historical marker. And I remember it was you playing the flute. There was another guy that had a hand drum. And it seems to me there was a third guy, but Mary Lou and I couldn't remember who that was.
There was a Todd Waltmuth who was uh, a spiritual guy. I don't know if he called himself a holy man or something, but he did some of the prayers and stuff. I know he worked a lot with uh, people in treatment and recovery, and I hardly knew him. I got to be I got to know his wife and his daughter, and I just saw him a couple times, and he just passed away in this last year. And and when I would get invited to something like that, I would be seeing and meeting people that um, and being accepted by them was always an honor for me. My last name's Murphy, and this is what I look like. My mother was darker, and she had dark hair. Ironically, her hair went pretty gray, and my dad's hair never turned until he got his cancer. Uh, but I remember my mother as just being a beautiful woman with dark hair, and you know the I want to meet a girl with that just like mom and stuff, and and mostly because it was 40 years ago, which means I was only like 9, but I was in my early 30s. But I didn't pay much attention to a lot of things about my parents, and I was always um, trying to be ignored by them so I could so I could do my own strange things and stuff. And uh, I we had I had there were 8 kids in our family, uh, um, and we had loving grandparents who were very different from each other, and not paying attention to that. My mom's folks were so soft spoken and kind and loving, and my dad's folks were not as soft spoken, but uh, as loving as they knew how to be. And I always, in hindsight, I look at my parents. They rarely raise their voice, and blowing in the flute softly, you're reminded that how we listened. And if you were in trouble, their voices would get softer, and you would listen harder. And the flute would taught me what that meant. And when you keep your voice soft, we don't forget that you are my little sister. I love you. And um, if I'm waiting for you to call me because my grandson has had a conflict this morning, we're doing this 2 hours later than we planned. And just keep my voice soft to remind myself that I love my little sister Susan. And when you called, I knew it was you, and I was worried that this was all going to fall apart. And no, because we love each other, we'll do it 2 hours later, and great. And so my grandson's sleeping and taking his nap, and I don't have I you have my full and divided attention.
Michael, of all the people I've met on this journey in the past 30 years, and meeting you in the last 10 of those years, you're one of the most soulful, reflective people that I've really enjoyed spending time with. I mean, when you talk, there's so much meaning to everything, and it's reflected in your music. And I was so lucky to be able to have some of your music in the Billy Caldwell film. So I'm going to be playing that throughout this podcast so people can hear your beautiful music. But I know you play the flute, the guitar, and then I heard you say piano. What else do you play?
Uh, there's a banjo right by me that I haven't picked up in 100 years. My children started playing the violin, and so I made a fiddle, and I would send it to school, this homemade fiddle, for their violin teacher, and the teacher would really politely say, they probably need another instrument because it was a full size and a little, and I would just laugh because I had a small violin for him to learn off of. But I learned to play a little fiddle, and on my father's side, my great grandfather used to play fiddle at the barn dances and such. He was just a drunken cowboy, and that was on my grandmother's side. So he was an Adams, supposedly a descendant of John Adams, John Quincy Adams. But I think he was the black sheep cousin, twice removed type of thing. When I met you, I didn't realize I was part Mohawk and Huron. I just knew we were Native American because my grandparents didn't talk about that. And I had a great grandfather down in Tennessee or Kentucky that his name was Sam Hill, was white man given name. And the hills, the Mohawk Hills, were people that lived on a hill, so they were all given that last name as Hill. And to find that, I go, well, he may have been one of those kids. And the Jesuits taught them how to read because they're grooming the girls to be wives for the pioneers and such. And so he was down in Tennessee or Kentucky and met a Scottish woman. And to think, wow, a Scottish woman, 100 years or 200 years ago, on her own in America, what a pioneer woman that would have had to been. And they got together and they had a couple children. The story goes that he went to a library and was not allowed to be there, and he could read. And so he stole the library book and went to prison. And so great-great-grandma took the kids up to Michigan or someplace and raised them. And those kids became teachers and teachers for the next couple generations. I think how, you stick a roadblock in, and that just makes us a little more stubborn about it. But my son uh, would dive into ancestry stuff and had me spit in a test tube or something like that to find out some things. But you don't find out everything. It doesn't, it just gives you some. I'm part I'm part Norwegian or Scandinavian or something, and we don't know if that's from because the Vikings conquered Ireland and had left children behind, or
Mhm.
because Leif Erikson and came to North America long before Columbus, and or possibly have a little blood from on both sides that came, and it's a mystery, and the I like to think that when I started playing the flute, opportunities came and I got to meet people, and so I think it's my mother that introduced us, and my mother introduced me to Billy Caldwell through your book and your movie and the podcast, and um, so my mom is still with me, introducing me to some wonderful, wonderful people.
I always felt that way about my mom too. She passed away a couple of years ago, and when she was laying in the hospital, and we kind of realized, it was the end. She was a little sad about it. I mean, I'm not expressing it very well, but the point I'm trying to make is we were there just kind of in the moment, and a thought came to me, and I said to her, "Oh my gosh, Mom, when you get up there, say hello to Billy Caldwell because I've been following this guy." And she laughed and laughed and laughed, and that's one of the last memories I have of her. And I just think about the synchronicities.
Your mom was with you at the ceremony, and that's the first time I met you. I met your mother, so my mom introduced me to you and your mother,
That's
and
right.
my and you you went on that whole journey with your mom until she passed, and then you continued on that journey with your mom on the other side,
For sure.
and you can't do anything without thinking of her.
Well,
Um, are you allergic to something?
well, I think about all the synchronicities in this whole journey and the fact that you're Mohawk and Huron. I grew up in the Detroit area and Lake Huron's there, and of course the Huron tribe was from around that area. And then the Mohawk area was upstate New York, and they moved up to Canada, and I went to the Mohawk village that Billy Caldwell was born in. He was part Mohawk, and
Mhm.
saw a lot of the tombstones of the great Mohawk leaders that were there at the Mohawk Village and the Mohawk Chapel, the White Chapel that was there. Joseph Brant and his wife. He had this beautiful name. I don't remember it, but very, very kind and gentle area. Beautiful people, and just the history is so amazing. And I'm so glad that you got in touch with some of your Native American roots.
I uh, one of the first things I got invited to play for a an honors night for the Nebraska Indian Community College, and I said sure, I'd love to. I was flattered, so I went to play, and they had a drum group, a drum circle, and and they were invited to play too, and um, uh, I was there on time, so I was playing the flute. And then these big guys came in. I'm 6'1", and I felt dwarfed. And they came in with their drum, and they're giving me the eye like, who the heck is this, And
What was it, a big drum or a handheld
a
drum?
big drum, a big
Yeah.
drum. And and so they were setting up their drum, and there was kind of a stage area, and so I was at one corner, and they were at the other corner, and they kind of got set up, and I was playing the flute. And I just kind of faded out with the flute song and gestured over. You can't really see me, but I just kind of gestured over to them. And they looked at me and they started beating the drum and, they sang a song and stuff. And as they were fading out with their song, I started playing the flute again. And they looked at me like, and after I finished the song, I gestured over to them and they went and did their thing. And and we did that until the honors thing started coming on. And here I am, some white guy, and doing this. And there was an old Omaha elder who was his name was Howard Wolf, and he was the one of the most honored elders in the community at that point. And Howard was a big older gentleman and blind from diabetes. And we're going to have a meal, and he kept a seat open next to him and invited me to sit with him. And everyone else could see me and thought, is he one of us? And Howard said, yes, he is.
Ah,
And after that, Howard would come to a couple of the demonstrations and pray and stuff before. And he knew I was there. And he goes, Michael, play the flute behind me while I'm doing this prayer and stuff. And I thought, wow, this is
so
hard.
beautiful.
And Howard said, one time we were doing a peace demonstration, and down at a military base here in Omaha. And he said, he talked about the sacred hoop, and about how there's all these colors in the sacred hoop, and how this circle is open for anybody to come as long as they honor and respect everybody else of all the colors
How beautiful.
in a peaceful way. And they looked at that military base. He goes, "That's not what we're talking about." And it just, and going over to Ireland with my flutes, and going to I didn't go to Stonehenge, but I went to one of the other circles, and you see these circles, that sacred hoop that the Irish had, and you see the pictographs of the people and how they lived back then, and they're wearing animal skins, and they've got roundhouses like the Central Plains Indians, not the teepees of the hunters, but the farmers and the gatherers and stuff. And they've got the bows and arrows and the spears and the little tomahawks, hatchets, and they've got flutes, and they've got the drums, and just reminding us that we're all the same, and their stories are the same, and our ancestors that we've forgotten are the same, and we all raise our children and our grandchildren on the Lion King and the Circle of Life, and you go around the world and you can find that circle, that line that we're all on, without a beginning and without an end. So your mom is here, and my wife, and my parents, my little brother, and my good friends, and our great grandchildren are already here, because there's no beginning and there's no first in line, there's no last in line. We're all equals, and so even though you're my younger sister, you're equal to me. Even though you're a woman, you're equal to me. And um, that's I in the last 40 years, the things that have happened because of the flu are all my mother still having an influence on me. And all, yes. Um,
I'm going to add to that, Michael, because there's a ripple effect. 40 years your mother's had an impact on you, but I think about your mother, and then with the music in the Billy Caldwell film, and, as people listen to you, the events that you go to, and the veteran events you go to, and the indigenous events you go to, there's a ripple. And people will continue to think about profound things you have said and music you have played. And I feel like we're all connected that way.
I, I'm grateful in a lot of respects that I I look more like my father than my mother, to remind people um, that and because I played the flute, sometimes I get very accepted in communities that don't look like me.
Hmm.
And sometimes because I don't look like them, I don't get accepted. And I have to realize they've got very good reasons to feel that way.
Of course.
We have a long ways to still repair things.
Yes, we do.
Movies like Billy Caldwell are part of that. Um, such a uh, um, when I watched that and I was learning all those things, I was connecting the dots that you were throwing out there to reflect on who we are now, and that means, I mean, um, it's it's hard to put together, but it's it made perfect sense to me watching it, and I remember learning that Chicago was a Potawatomi word, and it was Chickadee or something like that,
Yeah.
and it
There's a lot
means,
of spellings of it, and
yeah.
smelly onion and wild onion, and it's my heritage is Irish and Scottish and English, and so I felt that I had um, an opportunity to learn more about that side through Billy Caldwell and his Irish heritage and your Irish heritage, and I was so honored to work with the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation that they would help kind of build that narrative from the Potawatomi side, because as a white European woman, I just knew that there was no way I could fully tell that story without really kind of tapping into how the tribe felt about the history of Caldwell, because I had my opinion, and I found him as a fascinating leader from the Chicago area, but it in some ways it didn't really matter what I thought about it, because I was not the tribe removed from this area. And and it just was an honor to work with so many people, the musicians. That was part of my favorite part, was working with the musicians and going to the recording studio and capturing that sound at that time, at that moment, and working with the tribe and finishing the film. And I just want to thank you, Michael, because every time I've come to Council Bluffs and said, can you bring your flute and your guitar? You always showed up. And we were at Mary Lou's home that she was at and put on a concert there. And it's just such fond memories over the years. And I look forward to people listening to your music as we move forward.
You know, when you talked about doing the documentary, I said, "Oh gosh, could I do some music?" And he said, "Oh God, that'd be wonderful." And we talked about it. And then I heard other musicians, and I thought I got jealous and stuff because that's who we are. And then I heard their music and saw it and hear it in the film, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, it's awesome." And it's I mean, it was teaching me a lesson, because we get that way as musicians, and getting to meet the beautiful people that also contributed, and I it's my my grandson that's sleeping upstairs. He has Down syndrome, and people say, "Oh gosh, that's go." It's a blessing. And I don't have to babysit him. I get to, and I get to do things with him, and when it's an extension of the living through losing my parents and then with my wife that people say, gosh, it had to be so hard. I go, you don't know how powerful that love was, and that I got to play so much music for her in her last years, in her last months, in her last days, and just do anything I could for her. And they go, somebody that call and say, we're going to do this. I said, I can't. I was supposed to play in Washington, D.C. In October before she passed. And I was supposed to play at a Smithsonian event. Once again, because of the flute. And why am I getting asked? And so I told them, I said, well, because they do things months in advance. I said, my wife's got cancer. Don't worry about it. She's going to be fine. But if something happens, I just don't want to spring anything on. So she got sick that weekend and went in the hospital. And I called the people up and I said, I can't make it, my wife. And they were very understanding. And I told my wife and she was pissed. And she said, uh, uh, um, you can't turn down Washington, D.C. And I said, I've got something better to do. I've got something more important. She goes, what? I said, you're in the hospital. And a few months later, she was gone. I'm so grateful for that. And she goes, well, you'll never get another opportunity. And then I ended up going to Washington, D.C. And later on, a year or so later, and played for thousands of people and played for a bunch of things, and with a guy named Neil Young, and just and it's I had those opportunities, and I brought her with me then, and it was that having her um, uh, with me on here in this on my shoulder uh, um, when you called me this morning, and I was, I don't know how this podcast stuff works. You said you'd send me a link, and I'm your elder. this is
For sure.
this technical stuff is, and you said you'd send me a link, and I'm looking at my computer waiting for it to come on, and it came on. And it's asking me questions. And I go, how do I know? My kids aren't here. And I'm figuring it all out. But you said we could do it at 1 o'clock, and as we got off the phone, I went to pick up went to my grandson's swim thing that I was going to, that kind of interrupted our timeline. And so I was thinking about my mom, and I'm driving in the car, and things started coming to me. And this is I haven't done this. And so when I got home, I wrote down some words that were coming to me that mom was giving to me, and thinking about this. And so I'm just going to fake through it, and you can edit this out. And we'll probably need to edit this out. Um, but this will probably grow or disappear into cyberspace. But I'll probably sing this eventually. But 40 years ago, that's when my mother left. But shortly after she crossed, she left me with this gift. The first time that I gave it breath, I heard again her song, reminding me she's with me. She's teaching me right from wrong. Bringing me to places, she comes along with me, bringing me to people I never thought I'd meet. Susan Kelsey, Billy Caldwell, it's a mystery to me, some living, some now spirits. If I could read my writing. All gifts from mom to me. Dini Kiki, aho. My mom wrote that while I'm driving in the car. Shut up, Mom, I'm trying to drive. I got my grandson in the back seat.
Michael, is so beautiful. I don't know if Zoom picked it all up. So one thing, maybe you could just videotape yourself doing it and send it to me and I'll add it in.
I'll try to do that as soon as my grandson gives me the opportunity.
Yeah.
I know you want to
Um,
get this done right away. I'll
no,
have,
whenever it's convenient for you. And I mean, this is what I'm talking about. Things come to you. You're so intuitive and things come to you. And I've really learned that from you. Thank you.
well, we talked about taking care of ourselves,
Yeah.
and it's an extension. How we take care of ourselves is, people don't take care of the earth. And we look at people, they don't take care of themselves. So why would they? But people who take care of themselves, like you, and like I'm trying to,
Yeah.
we have that in the background. But I spend a lot of time running in the woods still because I can't run on concrete. And I spend a lot of time bicycling because I can't run all the time because I'm 10 years older than you, whippersnapper. But I wish I could swim in Lake Michigan like you can all the time. But I love open water swimming. The lakes here are they're just too much algae. I
Mhm.
can't swim in that anymore. Um, but I spend an awful lot of time playing music, and it's it's meditative.
Mhm.
And if I hadn't started playing the flute, I wouldn't have had all those hours of just being in uh, that mellow state of zen or whatever it is that the flute gives me. And it's um, it's been a wonderful journey, and you're part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, my dear. Love you.
Thank you. Love you too. Take care, little
Bye.
sis.